let's see. I wanted to talk about this new experiment that I've been doing over the last several weekends, and this is an experiment with the uh, autocompletion feature for a text field. So the desired behavior is as follows. We have a text field with some text with hashtags, and when we either move the cursor inside a hashtag or maybe focus on a hashtag, we want to have the popover with the suggestions for possible hashtag autocompletion, and then we can choose the suggestion either with the cursor or with the up or down arrows, and then when we either press enter or click on the selected hashtag, we want to insert it into the text field. Now that's the desired behavior, and the idea was to try to do this in React using whatever tools or libraries are available. So I got it to a reasonably working state. I'm not completely satisfied with it, but still I just wanted to talk about it anyway. Okay, so first of all, what are the possible approaches to solving this problem? What are the possible approaches for showing the autocomplete boxes? Now, this problem, the problem of showing the autocompletion, the suggestions for autocompletion, can be divided into several parts, and one of the parts is just to get the suggestions for autocompletion. This is a pretty trivial task. You would query a backend, or you will retrieve the possible suggestions from a, I don't know, JSON file or whatever. And there are quite a lot of implementations for doing that. There is this library called React or whatever that will provide a somewhat similar functionality. The up or down arrows do not really work in here, but the thing is, this library would show, well, first it would operate, if I remember correctly, it would operate on text fields. It would show the auto completion suggestions below the text field. Now, so the question of retrieving auto suggestion, of getting the list of auto suggestions, is one thing, and it is not particularly difficult to solve. What I was more interested in was to position. Once I get the list of autocompletion suggestions, I want to position this list close to the cursor or close to the word that I'm trying to complete. And this is a bit more difficult. So what are the approaches to tackling this particular problem, the problem of positioning the pop-up box next to the cursor? Well, if you think about the text box, as far as I'm aware, there are two main approaches. One would be to use, as this text box, to use the element called text area, and to enter the text in this text area. In fact, there is a library, a JavaScript library called carrot.js that is trying to demonstrate to do practically this on two types of input. So one would be the input that is a text area, and then carrot.js is trying to show the position of the cursor in that text area. Another input is an HTML element with the attribute content editable. Now let's discuss the pluses and minuses of these two elements, of these two approaches. Now, first, text area. So the text area, it accepts, or rather, the value of its content is plain text, which it may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, it depends on how we look at it. Definitely the text area is not going to provide you with rich text formatting, but perhaps you don't even need that, perhaps you don't even want that. So first of all, plain text, right? Secondly, text area basically does not have any API for telling the browser where the cursor, or the caret as it is called, where it is inside the text area. So caret.js, one of the libraries that is doing that, maybe there are others as well, so they're basically hacking the text area. And to demonstrate this hack, actually, I think on GitHub it's even more visible. So the text area or text field on a GitHub page, right? This text field has the feature of providing you with this pop-up that I'm trying to imitate. Now, how did they do that? Let's see. If we inspect the page, we will notice that the text element that is accepting the input is essentially a text area. But they want to somehow be able to give you the popover, right? And just as I said, there is no way for the browser to accurately report the coordinates of the caret, and you need the coordinates of the caret in order to position your popover. So what the text area based approach is doing, it would create, look here, a div, and in the GitHub page, the funny thing is that they would create very temporarily this helper element, the div, to which they would copy all the styles of the text inside this text area, and they would try to calculate the position of the caret in that div, right? And since a div can actually report quite accurately the position of its contents, they would try to extrapolate the position of the caret inside the text area from the position of some mock caret in that div. So they are adding the div with lots and lots and lots of styling, and they are hiding this div after a couple of seconds. I don't know why, just probably not to annoy us. I don't know. But yeah, that's the text area based approach. You create a mock element, you place it. By the way, do we see position absolute blah blah left minus 9,000 pixels? So you create this mock element, you place it off the screen at a huge distance away from the viewer, and you style it in the same way as your text area is styled, and you try to calculate the position of a mock element that is representing the cursor or the caret in that div, and you return that position of that element, and you decide that would be the position of the cursor in the actual text area. So yeah, that's a hack. Now, if you look at the content editable actually has the capacity of reporting to you the position of the cursor, or rather, when you have the cursor inside the text area, you can always insert an empty span next to the cursor and calculate the absolute position of that span, for example. So it's much easier, and in fact, I can. Let's see. This is quite a glitchy page, but I can even demonstrate the problems with the text area. So when you see what's happening here, my cursor or caret is still on line 1, but for whatever reason its position is being reported as having been broken to the line 2. I have no idea why this is happening, but this is the problem that I observed with this text area based approach. Now in content editable, can we even do this? Okay. So there are some glitches on this page. Anyway, so that was a problem with text area. It's not entirely reliable because of that hack. Content editable is more reliable in that regard, in the regard of the position of the cursor. The trouble with the content editable element is that it's up to the browser to decide how to mark up your text that you're inputting in this content editable field. So it was a standing joke that if you went to Google for quite a long time, when you inputted the word content editable, the result would be content editable is terrible, the article written by one of the Medium engineers. And indeed, if you try to break the line to go to the next line in the content editable, what the browser is doing, it arbitrarily is deciding right, here's your text, bold, italic, or bold, and it arbitrarily decides that when you break a line you want it another div. Also, if you end a line with a space, it starts adding the non-breaking spaces. Break the line again, and there is another div, right? And that's Chrome's behavior, and Firefox in these circumstances would produce a line break element, BR, instead of the div. So it's pretty unpredictable, this content editable element, and that's why it is pretty difficult for a developer to work with. Now that was the status quo for a long time, but this winter, I believe, Facebook came up with their implementation for React, their implementation of a text field that can work as a rich text editor. They called it Draft.js, and there is a wonderful presentation about the features and the thinking behind Draft.js. And the idea is that Draft.js, that text field, where do we have it here? It is a content editable field, but because React would re-render every time you change anything in its state or its props, there is a wonderful opportunity to separate the state from the presentation, from the view, and every time your contents of your text field change, that basically you can recalculate that using whatever crazy data structures the Facebook developers use. So you change this data structure, you change the state, and then you re-render content editable. So whatever new HTML elements the browser would insert, they would get overwritten by the re-render of this text text field, and that's beautiful, because as this developer of Draft.js argued, content editable is wonderful in the sense that it provides lots of native browser behavior. It can respond to blur events or focus event. It can deal with the right to left alphabets if you fancy that kind of using that kind of language. So lots of the functionality, the developers who would use content editable, lots of that functionality they would get for free. And the only thing that they would need would be a way to control the contents of the content editable, and that control of the contents would be provided by this Draft.js library. So what I tried to do was use this Draft.js library to do exactly that, to control the contents of the text area. Or rather the text field, right? And do different tricks after the contents change. Well, it was not a simple task, let me tell you. Not particularly simple for me, in any case. And I borrowed very heavily and liberally from the team that is behind this project, Draft.js plugins. So there is this wonderful team who took the Draft.js library itself. They refer to it as Draft.js engine, and they tried to reproduce the functionality that the Facebook text input would have. Right, and on Facebook you would probably be used to using emojis, and you could add mentions. Let me actually show you how this works. So it would be possible on Facebook to do something like "Hello Peter" or however Matthew. And there's this wonderful pop-up view that I was hoping to reproduce. And there, problem solved, right? Well, the trouble is the plugins by this Draft.js plugins group, they are somewhat limiting. So the mention plugin, while it functions wonderfully with mentions, it was not really designed to function with hashtags. You could change this trigger element from the @ sign to the hash sign, but then the plugin assumes that you would have a data structure that knows about people, and people would have names, and they would have avatars and so on, and hashtags definitely don't have names or avatars. So yeah, they also have the hashtag plugin, but the hashtag plugin didn't have autocomplete. Right, they had just hashtags. Pretty boring. So I tried to create my version of their mention plugin, in fact, but with hashtags. So what did I learn from that? Let me see. Well, first of all, how did they... I mean, it took me I don't know. I don't remember how many times I had to reread the code on their GitHub, trying to understand what the hell they're doing, until I realized that Draft.js has this interesting opportunity, this interesting functionality of having decorators. What is a decorator? A decorator is the functionality of giving Draft.js what is called a strategy, basically a pattern of symbols that it would somehow recognize. In my case, that would be a hashtag plus a word character, right? Something that is not a space, or a punctuation sign. And when Draft.js detects this pattern, and the idea is that every time you input a character, right, every time you do this, this, the state of the editor changes and the editor re-renders. So every time you change the state, the editor would run through its algorithms and look at the decorators if you provided any, and it would look at the patterns inside the decorators. And if you provided the decorator, it would take this, it would use the component to wrap the text that matched this pattern inside that component. So in fact, if we look at the text here, and if we look at its HTML structure, we'll see that, well, here, where's that? Here, I guess. Data editor, blah, blah. So here, the editor itself begins, and then the editor contains all the elements, all the text elements inside a data tree. Every roughly a paragraph it corresponds to what they call a block of text. Every block has a key. Oops. Was it this one? Yeah, I guess. So every block has a key, and every block also can be represented as a tree of containing different leaves. So that would be the first leaf of the tree. That would be the second leaf of the tree, the third, and the fourth. Oops, so the fourth one, right? So the idea is that if I have a text which is a uniform text, that would be just one leaf. Once I start having different styling, I basically wrap a different style in a style range or selection range. I do not quite remember what they call this, but a kind of range that would say that, okay, from character X to character Y, my text is going to be wrapped in the in some wrapper element, in this case a span. So that was a revelation when I realized that that's how this mention plugin was actually working. So once you have a span in here, you can calculate its absolute position. Once you have its absolute position, then you have the position where you want to put your pop-up box with the suggestions. And that is like the bird eye view of the problem. You break your text element into leaves, and the leaves that are interesting for you, make them behave as decorators. You call them decorators, and you give them the behavior of a decorator, and you record the keys of those decorators, and you can get the position of those decorators, and then you would place the pop-up box close to the absolute position of that decorator. So the rest of the problem was to actually implement that logic, and roughly this functions as follows. So this is the root component, which at this point, I do admit, is pretty large and pretty yucky, especially when at the last moment I started adding more functionality, trying to tweak its behavior to the way that I would want this thing to behave, and it made the code uglier and harder to understand. But what's happening in this component is that so I am creating the decorator, right, that I'm going to provide to the editor, to draft.js. And I'm saying, hey, here's the pattern, which is here, and in fact, draft.js was nice enough to provide an example somewhere in here that would be exactly for hashtags, a regular expression for detecting hashtags. They actually said that in production you probably don't want to use this regular expression, it's too non-specific, but I wasn't able to come up with any better way of detecting a hashtag. So a hashtag followed by some symbol belonging to a word. So that would be a strategy. Now, once this pattern is detected, then I want my text, my hashtag, in fact, be wrapped in this hashtag wrapper. There's a little trick in here because I wanted to pass to this element some additional properties. So that were not basically I want this hashtag to already have additional properties, and that was the only way to do that, to create a special function that would return a element already decorated with additional properties. Anyhow, so this would be a wrapper element for that hashtag. Let's see what it does. So when it is instantiated, it would receive particular properties, and some of those properties would be the offset key. The offset key is this key, this unique key. So it would record its own key, and it would also record its position, the top offset and the left offset of the span. Oops, let's say here. So, and it would render. The next, so at this point we get the text with hashtags, and we know the keys of each of the hashtags, and we know their positions. Now, when we so now we need to detect the moment when our caret gets inside the hashtag, and for that I'm using a special function, locate hashtags in text. Let me actually put it in here. So where was the logic? Basically, every time I change the editor state, and every time I change the cursor, the position of the cursor, I am changing the editor state. So every time I change the editor state, I check whether my cursor is inside the hashtag. For that, I'm using the API of Draft.js, and again, I had to basically copy that from the Draft.js plugins theme, because it's pretty hard to understand what these API properties or API methods, what they exactly do and when you would really need them. But in fact, what is happening here is first, well, there is this the global object, basically. Global is not a correct name here, but there's an object representing the whole state of the editor, the editor state. From this object, I can get a selection, and obviously every time I put a cursor, that is like a special case of the selection that starts at position X and ends at position X, right? So I get that selection. I know the anchor offset, if I remember, yeah. So the anchor offset of the selection would give me the number of characters, the offset of those characters from the beginning of the block. And remember, the block is the paragraph, essentially. So I can get the key of this block, the block key, and by having the block key, I can actually retrieve the block itself. So I can get access to this paragraph, and I can get access to the text inside this paragraph. You might think, or at least I thought that, genius, I can now get the text of this thingy by entering this key. But no, that was not the behavior of the API at all. So I can get access to the block. I cannot get access to a leaf inside the block. To do that, I needed to basically split this key of the block or of the leaf rather, into several parts. You can see the pattern in here. Can you? Yeah. Every leaf is basically designated by the name of the block, then a number, and then another number. So this is like number 0 of that block. The number 1 corresponds to this range. Number 2 corresponds to this range. Number 3 corresponds to this range, and then there is in the very end there is this number 4. Apparently I added another character. So right. So once I get the block, I can split this key of the block, or rather the key of the of my selection, of my decorators rather, right? Because remember, every time I created a decorator span, I was storing its key in this storage object. So I can cycle through all those keys. I can split them into their components, like the name of the the name of the block, the name of the number of the leaf, and so on. And that would allow me to essentially filter the ranges that correspond to the to the hashtag. In fact, let me quickly demonstrate. Oops, come on. I'm going to, sorry. Bang. So this is a place inside the function that is retrieving the information about the hashtag. So what do I know? What I know what the editor state is, right? I have the editor state object, and again, the fun thing about draft.js is that the Facebook engineers use this immutable JS library. So when you interact with the objects or with the entities, I don't know how to call them, with the elements of draft.js, you are not interacting with like the pure well-known JavaScript objects. You are interacting with something that is returned by the API of immutable.js. So okay, the editor state is this immutable thing. From that, I know the block key here. So by this block key, I can locate my paragraph, which I'm going to do here. So this is my paragraph. My paragraph is split, is represented by a list. Again, the data structure from immutable.js. So I know that this list consists of 4 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, and well, I know that I was what is my decorator key? 1. So I know that in this block. So here, right, what I'm doing is I'm first focusing on the elements, on the hashtags, on those decorator elements who are in the same block as my cursor is, right? Because I can extrapolate the block. I can get the block key from the position of my cursor. I can get the whole block from the position of my cursor. I can get the block tree from the position of my cursor. I do not really know whether my cursor is inside a hashtag or not. So I'm filtering all the hashtags from this cursor. Sorry, all the hashtags, because I can have many hashtags, right? I can have another line with hashtags. So I'm interested only in hashtags that are in this block. And then this is a nice bit. So I'm mapping over them, and this is the first hashtag. So what I get here when I got the block tree, which is a list, this is the API of interacting with the list, get in. So I can get in the element inside this list that has the decorator key, and the decorator key of the first hashtag would be 1. This thing, not entirely sure what that is, had the leaf key, which is 0. This returns me a record. Now this record, again, pretty horrible data structure, to be honest, has 2 entries, and if we look at an entry has the start, I don't know, an element, and the end element. In fact, we are talking about a range here. So what it is telling me is that my first hashtag is between character 6 and character 12. So once I get that, oops, I can return this object, and then I can. So now I know the now by this time, by this point, I'm getting an array of all the information of the hashtags, and particularly the ranges that correspond to those hashtags. And now, since I know where my cursor is and I know its anchor offset, I can filter all the hashtags and let this filter return only the hashtag whose start position is before my anchor offset and its end position is after my anchor offset, and that makes me be inside this hashtag, which is exactly what I'm doing in here. And at this point I have all the information. If I get the after all these manipulations after all this data massaging, if I get the hashtag, that means that I am inside that hashtag, and I know its key because, remember, the decorator element reported the key, which means that I know I have access to its coordinates and I can show it on the screen. Voila. So what were the difficulties here? Well, I still experience problems when I was trying to make this text field into something that I would actually want to interact with, and I would want to be able to focus on each of the hashtags. Oh, by the way, I completely forgot. So once I know that I am inside a hashtag, where does all this information come from? That's pretty pretty simple. There is a, where was that? Was it get autocomplete suggestions? There is this Wikipedia API, and by the way, quite recently they used to work only with JSON-P formats, which is pretty ugly. But a couple of months ago, they switched to allow people to just query this API, and they're returning a JSON object. So I'm sending the hashtag word to our hashtag term to Wikipedia and receiving the reply, and the reply is an array of values. So this is the reply from Wikipedia, basically. And when I select a reply, I am trimming all the white spaces away from that reply. So here's that other part of the logic. But that was the simple part. The more difficult part was then to coordinate the focus and the blur behavior of this element. And the thing is that the popover element, right, this thing, when I click on it, I'm basically going away. I'm leaving leaving the editor element, and in fact there was a bug at that point. Yeah, here the cursor is still in the element. The previous time the cursor disappeared. I don't know why. So here, oops. Right, still in here. So I'm blurring. I'm registering the blur event on the editor element, and this blur event is different from, let's say, this blur event. Right here, I'm also blurring. I'm moving my cursor away from the text from the editor element, and I wanted to be able to preserve the pop-up box after I blur. When I go back to the word, the pop-up box should appear. When I blur and go to a word that is not a hashtag, the box should not appear. When I move the cursor, well, when I click on a hashtag and basically registering a blurry event, but at the same time I'm still clicking on the hashtag, something should happen inside the editor element. And so that is what all the rest of the code is about. And I'm still not quite satisfied with how it works, because here on blur, for example, you can see that this is horrible. This is super ugly. So basically I have two events on this editor element when I click on a hashtag. So I click on it, and first of all, a blur event would register on the editor element, right? Secondly, the click event would register on the hashtag, and essentially I would have race conditions. And it turned out that in that race condition, the blur event on the editor element would win over the click event on this element. So this is a quick and very dirty way of fixing this, by setting the timeout and allowing the first event to come, the event from the hashtag to come first, and then registering the event that would say that what was that? That the pop-up should disappear, and basically that the editor was not focused. So yeah, that's basically it. That's what I wanted to communicate to the world. That is that GiraffeJS can be used for hashtag autocompletes, which obviously was apparent from these guys, but now that I've come through essentially the same logic as these guys did, I can confirm that it's possible to add the functionality of having the hashtag autocompletion in a GiraffeJS element. Okay, that was all that I wanted to tell you guys. Bye bye.